It is My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, and I am your host, Jon Justice. Glad you're with the Star Wars show this week as we take a look at another episode of the Book of Boba Fett. This week, it's the streets of Mos Espa. Plus, we have some listener feedback. Thank you to everybody who's written in using TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or leaving a comment up on YouTube. And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it if you would. And if you want to support My Nerd World, a Star Wars show and the other podcasts, which are available at mynerdworld.net, you can do so by picking up your preferred copy of my EMBARK science fiction space opera book series. Great for all ages, starting 11 years old and up. I've had kids as young as 11, all the way up into those in their 80s enjoy my stories. So if you want to support My Nerd World and a Star Wars show and the other podcasts with My Nerd World, I hope you'll go and check out if you're an avid reader and science fiction fan. And why wouldn't you be a science fiction fan? You're watching and listening to this Star Wars podcast. Go and check out my book series. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the episode. All right, so let's get to this week's show. We're going to talk about the Book of Boba Fett, and again, the latest episode 3, the Streets of Mos Espa. And I got a lot to say about this particular episode.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, I want to be honest right up front. Episode 3, The Streets of Mos Espa, really left me feeling flat. I gauge my enjoyment and my commentary around all Star Wars content on how it makes me feel. I don't like to nitpick. You know, I think there's a time and place for it, and I have a little bit of nitpicking going on with this episode. I will say that on a rewatch and hearing some other opinions and angles on a few aspects of the show that I was having a hard time with, I've changed my opinion a little bit. But ultimately, it left me feeling flat. The story in and of itself isn't really engaging me yet. I'm having not a difficult time in the way that Jon Favreau, Disney, and Lucasfilm have decided to portray Boba Fett. I don't have a problem with that. I do think that it is a little bit different to the character that was introduced in The Mandalorian Season 2. In The Mandalorian Season 2, that when in that third to last episode of The Mandalorian Season 2, when Boba Fett finally arrives on scene and he gets his armor back, we see him use his gaffy stick as a bad A against the stormtroopers. He gets his outfit. He gets his armor back, and he uses all the bells and whistles in his armor. He gets in Slave One, and he goes up to investigate Moff Gideon's ship. He uses his jetpack and the rocket to blow up one of the stormtrooper transports. And look, he met the expectations of what a lot of fans thought Boba Fett should be. I was trying to keep my expectation game sort of out of it. I'm basing my expectations on Boba Fett the character based off of what we know, what we were introduced to in Attack of the Clones, what we saw in the Clone Wars. I think they're doing a good job with carrying on the storyline of a young Boba Fett to an older Boba Fett. The only issue that I'm having right now is that the Boba Fett we're seeing in the Book of Boba Fett doesn't seem to directly align with the introduction that we were given of him in The Mandalorian Season 2. You look at when he rescues Din Djarin and the criminal from the Imperial facility in the second to last episode, flying Slave One. You look at his flying of Slave One in the season finale. The stinger of the season finale, where he straight up walks in and kills Bib Fortuna. And maybe we'll get more of a backstory of why he seems so inclined to just straight up murder the dude right out of the gate. But again, where did that Boba Fett go? Because the Boba Fett that we've seen now in the Book of Boba Fett is different. And we're getting his backstory. So the backstory seems to tell why we're seeing a different sort of kindler and gentler Boba Fett. But again, it seems very different than what Jon Favreau wrote of Boba Fett in The Mandalorian Season 2. So I am trying to be optimistic moving forward with the rest of the Book of Boba Fett. I'll continue to watch it, obviously. I've watched this episode, may have to watch it again. Watching it a second time, I changed my opinion on a few things. But like I said, ultimately, it left me feeling flat. I liked the setup at the beginning of the episode. I like the setup with the droid, showing the holographic image of Tatooine, showing the different factions, what Bib Fortuna had done, and then being introduced to one of the business owners on Tatooine who definitely has a problem with Boba Fett. Boba Fett seems to be sort of outmatched constantly, and I'm wondering whether or not this is building towards something, whether or not we're going to see the arc of Boba Fett where he does step up and become the crime lord, or he does begin to see that the gentler version of himself that he's attempting to portray really isn't working for him, because so far he, again, doesn't seem to be matching what a lot of fans thought Boba Fett was going to be, and this is dividing fans, and we'll talk more about this later, and what we saw in The Mandalorian Season 2, but I'm trying to keep an open mind. I'm intrigued by what happened with the Tuscan Raiders. Was surprised to see them wiped out so quickly. I'm glad that we're moving on from the Tuscan timeline. I just didn't expect it to be in that fashion. So I'm intrigued to find out what happens moving forward and how that has, and whether or not that has an impact on Boba Fett. Is Fennec Shand going to end up being a bad guy? She kind of was a bad guy when we were first introduced to her. She only really aligned herself with Boba Fett because he ended up rescuing her. And I think there was an expectation these guys were going to kind of be anti-heroes, and Fennec Shand still seems a bit of a mystery to me. I'm a little bit surprised that she's willing to go along with, again, this kindler, gentler version of a crime lord as Boba Fett tries to navigate his way through Mos Eisley. So that's intriguing to me. But again, ultimately, a lot of different aspects of Episode 3 left me feeling flat. And I have some issues with Robert Rodriguez's directing style. The way that he shoots his action sequences doesn't quite work for me. There were some aspects of the way the stormtroopers moved and the way that those scenes were crafted in that third to last episode of The Mandalorian Season 2 that Robert Rodriguez directed. And quite honestly, we'll get to the Vespa youth biker gang later on. But that chase sequence at the end of this episode, The Streets of Mos Espa, I thought was straight up bad. The choppiness of the way that it was filmed, the speed at which it looked like they were traveling, it just didn't seem exciting to me. And I put that directly on Robert Rodriguez and his visual style that doesn't always align with me. I also didn't think that the Black Kirstanton fight really worked either. There were some slow motion aspects of the way that he framed that particular fight that just didn't work for me. And I'll go back to that first episode that he also directed, the street fight with Boba Fett and the Nightwing assassins. That didn't really work for me either. So again, a lot of my criticism here is stemming from Robert Rodriguez's style, less about the storytelling. But when it comes to the storytelling too, I'm kind of wondering why it's taking so long to get this going. Where are we building to? This series, and I've heard some other people argue this point, this series seems to be one where it would have been better if they had released it all at once on Disney Plus, as opposed to giving us a weekly show. I think that if we'd had it all at once and we were able to sort of binge watch this from beginning to end, I think perhaps we might have a different angle, or I might have a different view, seeing faster where it's going. Now we've got some time to sit on it, and it is dividing fans. The portrayal of Boba Fett is dividing fans quite a bit, and I think it's dividing fans because Disney and Lucasfilm have an issue when it comes to giving backstory and demystifying characters and creatures and settings that we've seen before and spent a lot of time on. So with Boba Fett, there's a demystifying of Boba Fett taking place here. It's not aligning with a lot of fans and what their expectation was of Boba Fett. I think that's why they chose to do The Mandalorian the way that they chose to do The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian had no preconceived ideas attached to it, and I talked about this at length when The Mandalorian debuted. We've got a guy that looks like Boba Fett that's not Boba Fett. We've got IG-88 that looks like IG-11, but it's not IG-11, it's ID-88. So you can strip away any ideas of what you thought you were going to get, and we can introduce this character fresh and new, and you can go along for the ride, and we all loved it and accepted it. You bring in Boba Fett, and suddenly now you've got a lot of individuals who aren't really going to want to pay attention to what happened with a Boba Fett, a young Boba Fett and Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, aren't really going to want to pay attention to the character that we were introduced to in the Clone Wars, even if they are going and carrying on that storyline. They wanted to see a Boba Fett that they read in the expanded universe. They wanted to see a Boba Fett that's now in the Legends comics. They wanted to see this lethal bounty hunter, and what they're getting is this kindler, gentler crime lord that seems to be outmatched every step of the way. Now, again, maybe it'll change, but this is a danger that Disney runs into when they begin to demystify characters, creatures, places, settings that we visited before. The Tuscan Raiders, right? We were told these were mindless savages, to the point where we didn't care nearly as much that they were wiped out by Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones. The women and the children, too. They murdered, for all intents and purposes, his mom. Now we've been introduced to a tribe of Tuscan Raiders that we are, sort of feeling sympathy for. Again, I'm not saying that I have a problem with it, but I can understand why fans are kind of going, okay, you're turning these characters and demystifying a lot of these things that we were told were one way and now there's something else. And that takes a while for fans to kind of warm up to. The Rancor. The Rancor is arguably supposed to be the most fearsome creature in the galaxy, right? Introduced to in Return of the Jedi, to the point in one of the episodes where the Nightwing assassin was willing to have his throat cut rather than go and reveal who hired him. And yet, when he's thrown in the Rancor pit, he gives up the goods. And yet, we're introduced to a Rancor, which I thought was cool, but now we get a backstory, and we find out they don't really attack unless they're threatened. Boba Fett is now bonded with this Rancor and is scratching him behind his ears. Again, this is not a criticism. This is just another example of the sort of demystifying of a creature in this case that I think a lot of people thought was supposed to be this savage beast that potentially couldn't be tamed. This part of Tatooine, we've known Tatooine to be a place that you don't necessarily want to visit. Luke wanted to get away from Tatooine. In this show on Mos Espa, we've seen there's some nicer parts to Tatooine. The bar that we go into in the first episode where we meet Jennifer Beals portraying the Twi'lek when he's given the credits in his helmet. If you look around the room, it's got a nicer aesthetic to it. It almost has a bit of a Canto Bight, almost prequel-y feel. Okay? Then you get to the Vespa youth mods, right? The cybernetic young group of kids. I had a big problem with that particular moment in episode 3 because the Vespas, their speeders, just seemed really out of place being on Tatooine. I get the idea of the reason why they designed them that way. It really does fit into the style that George Lucas was going for and what inspired him going back to sports cars in the 50s and 60s. Here you have sort of British mod culture, Vespa-like vehicles, painted in brilliant colors. You have these kids that are dressed very differently. They look like they belong on Coruscant or Canto Bight. They don't look like they belong on Tatooine. Now, if we get more context to this and we see there's a whole subculture here, then maybe I won't be taken out as much as I was. I've heard a lot of individuals give their opinions on the Vesper Bike Gang, and I've kind of changed my tune. And watching it a second time, it didn't seem nearly as jarring. I do wonder how they can afford all the cybernetic enhancements and the really cool speeder bikes, and yet they still need water. I thought that was a weird choice in terms of the riding. So they can afford upgrades, but they can't afford water. So getting back to the point I was trying to make, this is an issue that Disney's going to have whenever they play in this particular area of giving us more details and backstories. And this doesn't necessarily relate to the biker, to the kid Vespa gang. But it does relate to what I mentioned. Boba Fett, Tuscan Raiders, the Rancor, this part of Tatooine. They're expanding upon that which we've spent a lot of time with as fans, and it's not really aligning with what we are used to seeing, and that has a tendency to divide fans, especially a character like Boba Fett more specifically. And I get that. And it bums me out when I see that, right? I don't... If you loved it and you think it's great and you don't agree with anything I'm saying, man, that's awesome. Art and film, movies, television shows, it's all music, it's all subjective. But I hate seeing when people are going at each other. You know, somebody goes and complains about the Vespas, and then somebody goes and after that person saying, you don't get it, you know, you're trying to have ownership of Disney. And no, man, just, hey, we all have differences of opinion. It's cool. There's no way to get away from that on social networking, though. It's just the nature of the world that we live in right now. I will say that one thing that does have me kind of excited is that if these Vespas, for lack of a better term, right, the kids with the body enhancement modifications, if this is, you know, signaling that we're going to get more prequel era type aesthetics in the current content that we're getting, I'm all for that. I want to see more of that. George Lucas always grounded his creativity and what he made in Star Wars in a sense of reality, where he wanted to see a lived-in universe. And when you go outside and you drive around, you see buildings, you see vehicles that are decades old. And I would like to see more prequel era style vehicles and aesthetics in the current storytelling, because I think it fits. Even though there's many decades apart, it would be great to see, you know, a Naboo starfighter. And it is kind of cool to see these vehicles that would really fit, and the clothing of the mods of the young mod gang, the clothing of them and the way that they're designed, man, they would fit right into Canto Bight, and I love that. I think that's great. I think it bridges the gap there. I think that it perhaps it has the opportunity to give people a different perspective on what they saw in Canto Bight. One of the young the young character, the male that has the cybernetic enhancement on his eye, he looks like he walked right out of the Canto Bight Casino. So if we're going to be getting more of that, fantastic. If this is kind of a one-off, it just seemed very jarring and out of place to be on Tatooine. This feels a bit like it's Jon Favreau's pet project. You have directors that are well established. They put out a mainstream film. It's really popular, and then they kind of go off and they do their own thing because they have that freedom. Steven Spielberg, Christopher Nolan are some good examples. They do a studio film, and then they kind of do a pet project film. Jon Favreau's done this as well. You know, does Iron Man, and then he does Cowboys and Aliens, does kind of his pet project. This feels like a bit of a pet project for Jon Favreau. And I think for me personally, it might be why for this particular fan, it may not be for you, but for me, it's kind of misfiring. It seems as if he had a very specific idea of what he wanted Boba Fett to be and the style of show they wanted to make. I thought it was going to be something more along the lines of Sopranos and Crime Lord and Underworld, but so far, I know that it has all of that, but it hasn't really melded together in a way that's really, really grabbed my attention yet. So far, again, like I said, it's just been kind of leaving this fan feeling flat. I'll be watching next episode. I'm anticipating next week's episode. I'm looking forward to it. I hope it takes a turn, but, you know, I have this several notches down from the enjoyment that I had of The Mandalorian. This does not feel on par with The Mandalorian for me yet. So I'm very interested to see if my opinion changes as we get deeper into this, 7 or 8 episode series. As always, what do you think, though? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. Speaking of comments, let's get into our listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, first one comes from a friend of the show, Edwin Lowe, and host of the Lowdown Show on YouTube as well. Hope all is well with you and your family. It is. My question for you is this. Remember when there were talks about a Boba Fett movie? Do you think they should have done a movie instead of a TV show, or neither, and let Boba Fett alone? I have no problem with them going and giving us Boba Fett content. Based off of what we've seen so far of the Book of Boba Fett, it definitely lends itself more to a TV show. I don't think that what we've seen so far, if that's what they were going to do, would have been great for a movie. And I have to imagine that a movie would have been something similar, where we would have gotten more backstory. We would have seen how he got out of the Sarlacc pit. We would have seen what happened to him afterwards, and they would have, created a character based off of that. Maybe it would have gone a different direction. Probably would not have been written by Jon Favreau, and the movie they were going to do was probably going to be very, very different. That being said, from what I've seen so far, no, I think it's better as a TV show. Edwin goes on to say, I'm glad they got away from the Tuscan storyline. I really enjoyed the episode a lot more being in the present day and seeing Boba build his crew and trying to figure out what's going on with the mayor and the Pikes. I wonder why they keep showing the same flashback of Boba on Kamino. And that's another criticism that I have. They've shown that same flashback now from a couple different angles, but one particular shot of him running by in the room at night, well, you never know if it's night on Kamino, but with Django taking off in Slave One, and it's been the same shot, and I'm with Edwin on this. It seems weird to me they keep recycling that shot. It's the same shot every time. I hope they show more Kamino besides that one. Also, do you think that Boba feels some regret for helping the Tuscan Raiders? If they didn't try to meddle with the Pike's train route, maybe the village would still be alive. They were doing better without Boba's help. Or maybe it's their destiny always to be slaughtered like animals. Like poetry, it rhymes. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll have to see what happens to Boba Fett from here. We still have some years in play. And, now since the slaughter of the Tuscan Raiders, which again kind of took me by surprise, it'll be interesting to see how that ends up affecting him, and maybe this is a part of the reason why we're seeing this kindler, gentler crime lord who wants to rule with respect and not fear. As always, thank you for the comment there, Edwin. Renee Davis says this: enjoyed episode 2. Okay, really like the new format. She's talking about the previous week's episode. Once again, I agree a lot with your commentary. One very enjoyable moment for me was Boba Fett dancing his rite of passage with the Tuscan Raiders. Reminded me of Dances with Wolves. That said, I'm still concerned and unhappy that Disney seems to be solely backpedaling by catering to its hardcore fans rather than this term casual. I feel the whole description of these terms is not very encouraging across the internet. It seems stuck in the past, and it does not appear to value its future fan base. Just endless, boring, minute details when I personally want to see more futuristic projects. I feel a grave injustice was done to pander to pressure when we have a wealth of continuation material in the last 3 movies. I disagree from one aspect here, and I do agree a lot with what you're saying, Renee. I don't think there's a pandering to pressure here. I think that Disney knows that there's a lot of space to be mined in this particular era between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. I'm with you, though. I want to move on, and I want to move forward in the timeline based off of The Rise of Skywalker. She goes on to say, the future is the last 3. I think then will I give my heart to Star Wars again. So much potential for continuity. A Grey Jedi Order. The training of all the Force sensitives. The name Solo continues just to mention a few. Like Dune, Star Wars is not George Lucas's anymore. It needs upgrading to be enjoyed by all. Keep safe, Renee in UK. Yeah, and I really hope they do move forward. I loved what they did with The Rise of Skywalker. I think there's some good, there were some good additions there with the Sith Eternal, the concept of the dyad, and I know that eventually we'll move forward in the timeline from The Rise of Skywalker, but right now they want to play in this time period between the sequels and the original trilogy, and apparently we're going to spend a lot of time pre-prequels as well. And it remains to be seen how that content is gonna come out. I'm hopeful, but I'm getting close to burnout on original trilogy content. I know we got a lot of it coming up, so I'm looking forward to it. But I'm with you. I'm ready to move forward and curious to see when we go way back what it's going to look like as well. Last comment this morning. John, what did you think of Black Kirstanton? I never heard of that character before because I hadn't read the comics, but when he walked on screen, the air left the room. Wow, he looked amazing. The costuming was incredible. When he gave Boba that side eye as he was walking away, I literally gulped. I hope to see more of him. Great show as usual. Look, I had the same reaction. I had to go and do some digging into who Black Kirstanton was and found out that he was a rather popular character in the comics, and a lot of fans of his were really excited to see him. And I know a lot of people were happy with the fight that he had in Jabba's palace, well, now Boba's palace, when he pulled Boba out of the Bactapod. But I had a bit of an issue with it, and again, it goes back to Robert Rodriguez's styling. I thought that particular fight scene left something to be desired. I do wonder if Disney didn't realize how popular Black Kirstanton was going to be. They put it in more as an Easter egg because it seemed rather unceremonious the way that he kind of trotted off screen at the end of episode 3. It reminded me of when Padme was running across the sands of Geonosis after she fell out of the gunship at the end of Attack of the Clones. You know, when the clone trooper runs up, "Are you okay?" "Uh-huh," and then she runs away. When Black Krrsantan went running off screen, it just seemed very out of place to me. And I wonder if we're going to see much more of him, if this was something that was supposed to be more of a one-off to play to fans, but yet realizing only after the fact they stumbled across a character that people actually wanted to see a lot more of. And if that's the case, I'm sure they'll reintroduce him in future projects. So as always, what do you think? I hope I wasn't too negative. I enjoyed the episode, but like I said, it kind of left me feeling flat. But I want to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, if you want to support My Nerd World, you can find out more things about My Nerd World at mynerdworld.net. Links are available right there on the homepage, as they are on the YouTube page as well, to go to Amazon to check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. 6 books in the series, with book 7 on the way. Great for all ages. If you love Star Wars, if you like reading in science fiction, I hope you'll go and pick up your preferred copy of the series, whether it's ebook, paperback, hardcover, or audiobook. For those that are new to the show and you're wondering what is EMBARK about, here's the blurb for book 1 of EMBARK. Katha dreamed of traveling beyond the known galaxy. Now humanity's survival will depend on it. A year after her beloved aerospace engineer father mysteriously passed away, headstrong pilot Katha Morrow discovers he left something behind for only her to find. Her excitement quickly turns to fear when she learns that an industrial accident inside a D-Corp civilian and military spacecraft factory has sparked an apocalyptic chain of events. While the ruthless Synargum of D-Corp attempts to exploit the global evacuation and gain control, Katha realizes the significance of what she's found and can't escape her destiny. As Earth's evacuees stand upon the brink of annihilation with the help of a ragtag squadron of pilots, Katha might be humanity's greatest and only hope against the tyranny of D-Corp's evil leader. I wanted to know what it was like to go and create my own universe, and I set out to write EMBARK Book 1 and enjoyed the process so much that it's turned into a 6-book and soon-to-be 7-book series. I hope you'll go and check it out and pick up, again, your preferred copy at Amazon.com or at mynerdworld.net. And that wraps up the show this week. I'll be back again next week to give my thoughts on the Book of Boba Fett, Episode 4. Until then, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, you are safe. For you as well, your comments up on YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe, and also drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.